Thank you, John, and thank you, Nikki, as well, for getting everything set up behind the scenes there. Just then, a little bit of introductory stuff about today's course. Obviously, it's a GCSE Drama Unit 1 Standardisation course, but as you'll appreciate, with a 2-hour online slot, we're not in a position to be able to do a full standardisation exercise. Many of you will hopefully have received the materials and may have even had a chance to do some reviewing and some pre-stand exercises on the work that we're going to have a look at today. During the session, what we're going to do is to dip in and out, give you a sense of standardisation of the national standard and an opportunity to ask relevant questions to each portion of Unit 1 as the course unfolds. All the materials I will go through in a short while that should have been sent. If they haven't been sent to you, all the written materials are available in the takeaway pack that you download at the end of this session, and I will let you know how to access the DVD footage, which we're going to look at a very short extract from today. Don't worry if you haven't got the pack, or if you've got the pack but you haven't even opened it, or if you're in a position where you've done quite a lot of work. We've been running face-to-face and online events all term, and we've found that we've had delegates in all three of those positions at every event, and they've all managed to get something from the course and to find it productive. Okay, the first thing that I'm going to ask you to do then is to take a look at the Edexcel website, which Nikki is going to pull up for me as a screen share. It's the Edexcel GCSE Drama homepage, and this will hopefully be a familiar sight to you all. I think perhaps at Edexcel Pearson they may have a little of an over-optimistic view of how much time drama teachers have in the average week to spend their lives browsing the website. But this is actually a really important resource for you in terms of gaining support and essential information for your students and for running the examination. What I'm going to ask Nikki to do first of all is just to hover the cursor around the got a query bullet point. Sorry, completely lost my phrasing there. Got a query, and it says contact Teaching Performing Arts, and then you've got an email address there. That email address is for our subject advisor for performing arts, which covers GCSE drama. His name is Paul Webster. I'll be giving you this email address again later, and it's a very, very quick way if you're struggling and you're trying to find some support materials, email Paul, and it's his job to reply to you and to support you. And he is based at Edexcel full-time, more or less full-time. He is there almost every day, so he should be in a position to answer your questions. There's also a very good service called Ask the Expert, and this is answered by experts from home, so it's not quite as an immediate a response necessarily, but it should be a 2-day turnaround for the majority of queries. And on Ask the Expert for GCSE drama, your two experts are myself as the principal for Units 1 and 2, and Jenny Spooner, who's the chief examiner and principal for Unit 3. So you do really have access to the whole senior team through that service. And once again, I'll be telling you how to access that later on in the event. Okay, Nikki, would you mind just taking a look at the controlled assessment tab, which is at the top on the right hand side, and just click on that one for me, please, Nikki. And as that scrolls down, you will see that you've got a long list of sorry, I'm just going to full screen on my screen, a long list of documents that are extremely useful for controlled assessment. Nikki, could you scroll right down to the bottom, please, of that list, and you can see the Principal Moderator's report for Unit 2 and for Unit 1 as well. I'm not just saying this, guys, because I wrote them, but these are very, very useful resources. This is feedback on what happened from all of our centres last year, and I know that you're busy and that you may not have time to read every single word, but there are some great sections in there which will be of enormous help to you. one of the greatest sections, I believe, in terms of supporting centres is looking at examples of low scoring, medium scoring and high scoring work in each unit. So do take a look at that. Your exams officer should be able to print those off for you if you have issues with printing and access, but you shouldn't. If you scroll a little bit further up for me, Nikki, you can see that that's lovely. There are two documents called Controlled Assessment Record Cards, and you've got 5GR02, which is about 2/3 of the way up, and you've got 5GR01, which is towards the bottom, strangely enough. And these are the assessment forms that you will need for entering your students for Unit 1 and Unit 2. The exemplar materials for these units are also in this controlled assessment folder. And if you scroll a little bit further up for me, Nikki, you can see a folder called Exemplar Materials, one for 5GR02 right at the top, and 5GR01 a little bit lower down. Both of these have got 2012 as a date, and those are the most recent example materials that we have produced. They're not exemplar, actually. They're examples of how one centre approached Units 1 and 2. And these 2012 materials do include Level 1 and Level 2 examples. So you can see students who are operating at full marks, at close to full marks, and but in that borderline between the top of Level 1 and the bottom of Level the bottom of Level 1 and the top of Level 2. Okay, so you've got those very high achieving students' responses in these documents, and it also will explain to you how to access a DVD so you can see some practical work, giving you an example of students working at those levels. We've also got, if you wouldn't mind going back up to the very top list, Nikki, there's a tab called Teacher Support Materials on the right hand side, third one down. If you could click on that one for me. That's lovely. And you can see again that you've got your assessment forms in this document as well. Also, the 6th document down is the Administrative Support Guide for June 2013. If you haven't seen this document, this is probably the most important thing that I can say to you today, is to download and print this document or to save it to your hard drive. This document is your Bible for running the examination. It tells you everything that you need to know about the administration, about what you're allowed to do, about what you should do in certain situations, including FAQs and including background information on some of the queries that you might have. So do make sure that you save this to your computer or print this so that you've got that accessible. And it also includes hard copies of all the assessment forms for all 3 units. Nikki, if you just take us back to the home page again for me. If you can collapse that list of files. There was just one more thing I wanted to show everybody. That's lovely. Oh. Just at the bottom of the screen there should be a window which has got a little play button on it. Here we go. This is just an example of one of the online courses that we ran last year. Obviously you'll be sent a link to this course on Unit 1 at the end of the event, but there are also Unit 2 standardisation courses that we have recorded, and these will be available. And this linear event that we did last year is also quite an informative one, as well as looking at the issues raised by the linear changes. And as you're no doubt aware, we haven't been dramatically affected by the linear rulings, but this course also does look at planning and structuring your course for your students, and particularly if you're somebody who's perhaps only been working with students on Edexcel GCSE drama for a short amount of time, you might find this a really useful resource. And as all the resources on the website are, it is actually free. Okay, thank you very much, Nikki. If you want to take us out of the screen share and back to the presentation, we're just going to find out a little bit more about you. So we've got a poll for you to do. which is called Who Are You? And the options for your poll are you an NQT that's new to Edexcel, an NQT with experience of Edexcel, teacher new to Edexcel, teacher with experience of Edexcel. And maybe you feel that you fall into one or two of those categories because perhaps you've returned to Edexcel after a gap or so on. So just fill in as best as you can. Okay, that's interesting because it looks as though we have the majority of delegates today are experienced teachers. It's interesting for me to know in terms of leading the course so I can think about what I can do to support you further. One of the tough things about standardisation is that experienced teachers, particularly those that have knowledge of previous specifications, often struggle a little bit with the standard as compared to some of our younger and newer colleagues, simply because we can get very set in a mindset. Some of the issues that centres may have could be to do with having a 1699 head-on from our legacy specification rather than having a really clear idea about the demands and the assessment criteria for 2D01, which is our current specification. So that's just something that's worth being aware of for all of us. And I'm just going to broadcast those results for you to see. But actually it's 13 of you that are experienced teachers, and we've got a couple of teachers who are new to Edexcel there. Okay, right, back to our course then, and we're going to think about what it is that we're doing here today in terms of Unit 1 standardisation. So the official aims of the course as follows. So you're going to have an opportunity to develop a fuller understanding of both papers in the unit. Now, I mentioned 2 papers, and I'm sure you're aware from doing your OPTEMS last year, most of you, that for Unit 1 you complete 1 OPTEMS for your practical marks and a second OPTEMS for your documentary response or evaluation marks. We're going to focus mainly on documentary response today, as is appropriate for this type of session, but we are going to have a look at the evidence for the practical unit in terms of identification of students, in terms of looking at some of the DVD evidence, and also at the record of work, which is a vital piece of evidence. I mentioned that some of you may have pre-reviewed the materials, and some of you may not, so don't worry about that too much. And we're also going to just think about those key admin aspects of submitting work for moderation, and that's really what you're going to ask me when you submit your questions. We're also going to have some open question discussions so that you can talk to each other, trying to kind of mirror a little bit what we do when we meet in a face-to-face environment. So already what you should have received would be the DVD for Edexcel, which for Unit 1 covers the theme of change. The DVD actually has both the 5DR01 and the 5DR02 work on it, and the records of work and the documentary responses for Unit 1 are in a red booklet, which also contains the Unit 2 materials. So if you haven't if you haven't received your pack, then don't forget I'm going to tell you how to access that at the end of the session, and all the written documentary responses, records of work and so on will be with you at the end of this pack for Unit 1, as well as a moderator commentary with marks and comments for all the candidates' work for 5DR01. Okay, so for Unit 1, I want you to imagine that I'm holding a ball in my hand. It's really frustrating for me as a drama teacher to be doing online inset. So use your imaginations, guys, and imagine that between my 2 hands, I'm holding a ball. That ball is my central topic, theme, or issue. My students for Unit 1 and yours for Unit 1 will be taking that starting point of the topic, theme, or issue, and they will be striking out in a range of directions through at least the 2 different types of stimuli that are presented to them, and using at least the 4 strategies and the 2 examples of the drama medium that you have planned for them. And there will be opportunities to use the specific elements of drama as well. So from that central point, you're going to be striking out in different directions. It's very much a unit where students generate ideas, they generate imagination and creativity, and your choice of stimulus there is absolutely key. But we at Edexcel our part in this is to have a look at your records of work and try and work out what you did, because we only see 1 hour from every centre, or one session I should say, because it could be less than an hour, it could be more, up to a maximum of 2 hours. The rest of your 6-hour exploration, the only evidence we have of that is what the students write about in their documentary responses and what you tell us you've done in that record of work. And for that reason, it's vital that your record of work is a record of what each group of students actually did and not a planned scheme of work. So the difference would be that in a planned scheme of work, there would be a list of proposed activities that students might do in response to the chosen topic, theme or issue. But in a record of work, there is a clear list of what students actually did. Now, it doesn't have to be beautifully typed out. It may well be very much a scruffy working document with highlights, with things crossed out, with things scribbled on the side. We want to encourage our centres to be creative, start with a plan, but if something looks more interesting, or if you want to follow one particular avenue, all you need to do is to amend your record of work accordingly, so the moderator knows exactly what you have done with those students. And don't forget, every group of students that works in a separate class will have their own record of work submitted by you as the teacher assessor. Now, what we're going to do to begin with is we're going to pretend that we are moderators and have a look at the record of work that this centre has produced for us, recording their students' exploration of the theme of change. So, Nikki, if you wouldn't mind just pulling up that document for me. It's a PDF. We're only going to look, in terms of time, we're obviously a little bit limited, so we're only going to look at the first 2 pages, which covers hours 1, 2 and 3. And the question that I want you to consider as you read through this is, how far does this record of work show that students have explored the theme of change through the chosen stimuli? Okay, so hours 1, 2 and 3. You've got the stimulus materials listed at the top and the activities that follow. There may be questions that related to the record of work that you want to bring up, which you can type into the chat window. Equally, there may be comments that you wish to make that can add to or extend our open question. What I would like to see is that you can pick up on certain things that a moderator would certainly pick up on, and that will hopefully then be useful to you back into your centre. Don't forget, the record of work's not marked or moderated per se, but it is a vital piece of evidence because it puts into context the written work for paper 2 and the practical sample session for paper 1. Okay, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to read through that and to start typing in your questions. And I'm going to just mute my microphone so I'm not tempted to rabbit on and distract you all. So I'll be back in. Now that lasted long. Just to say that Nikki is going to unsync that document so that you can scroll that individually and go down to the next page rather than waiting for that to be done for you. Okay, back in 4.5. Okay, guys, I've got a few questions and comments that have come up in the box, and just to comment first of all about the centre that have very kindly and generously given us their materials. Obviously, it's a huge task to get not only the student permission but also the centre and teacher assessor permission to use any work for standardisation that's going to be made accessible to the whole country. Many of us, I think, would shy away from having our work looked at in the way that any example work is going to be looked at by drama teachers. So just to acknowledge that this centre has been hugely generous in offering their materials to us, and also the difficulties in actually gaining work for standardisation. We started with a short list of 10 centres, and for various reasons those 10 centres came down to this one centre. In terms of the comments that you've made, a couple of you have spotted the fact that there is a sense this is very much a scheme of work. It's a we will rather than what the students actually did. Now your record of work may be based on your scheme of work. So you may have those activities planned in the future tense and thinking about what students will do. Having said that, just some kind of indication that there was some interaction with that is a helpful thing, that you're just ticking off activities or maybe indicating what happened in each session in a slightly clearer way than perhaps happened at this centre. Scott comments that possibly there's not enough practical activity going on in hour 1, 2 still images only for an hour's practical session. Now, there's two things about this. One is that if you have a look at hour 1, under the lesson's objectives, we're focusing on the practical, but the activities do include some non-practical drama activities. For example, we've got some brainstorming, categories of change, which might well be a very good preparation activity to prepare students, but it's not really a practical drama activity. Equally, the evaluation and the sharing of work in this centre, while sharing of work is very helpful and is part of exploration, evaluation is assessed in paper 2, which is your written response. So when students are evaluating, they will evaluate, they must evaluate as part of their exploration sessions, but you've got to consider how you can give your students 6 hours that is really clearly practical drama, because that's what they're all entitled to. So that's one of the issues about this. Another is the fact that we can look at a record of work and say, there's not enough activities here, but we're always very much thinking with the heads of our students, our groups. Now, we all know if you have 2 groups of students and you see one first thing on a Tuesday and the other you see them last thing on a Friday, what you're going to get done in those respective sessions will be different. Equally, different groups of students will be able to manage different amounts of work according to their ability, according to their dynamics and so on. So a moderator would certainly notice that perhaps the activities aren't as thickly structured in this session, but we need to take it as just a piece of the evidence. This is why the centre has produced a record of work, so we can try and get a feel for how much work was done in that 6 hours. Again, Russell comments on being a bit short on content. Teresa says it was very clearly set out though, which is absolutely right. It's really professionally presented, it's very clear, and from a moderator's point of view, we're in a position where we can really see how these students have met the requirements, and that's one very important purpose of the record of work. Suzanne asks, is it advisable to choose less stimuli, one text and one visual, so it can be developed more? And I think that's a really interesting question, Suzanne. You'll notice from this record of work that hour 1 and hour 2 do not actually relate to the stimulus materials at all. Now, obviously, Unit 1 is about exploring a central theme, topic or issue through those 2 chosen stimuli. So how deeply students can get into that topic, theme or issue if they aren't actually getting to the stimulus material is again something that a moderator would question. And in terms of the activities done in hour 1 and 2, it might well be that you want to do those as pre-assessed activities to prepare your students for Unit 1, so they go into the unit feeling very, very secure about the theme and about what they're going to be doing, but not having actually got down to a stimulus material with a sort of enough resonance to generate some excellent quality work, or work up the standard those students should be working at. So back to Suzanne's question, is it advisable to choose less stimuli, one text and one visual? It's really all about benefiting your students. Some students really respond well to textual stimuli, and they can pull that apart and deconstruct that very easily, and therefore that gives them the support into going on and doing their practical activities. Other students will struggle and might respond better to visual stimuli, to oral stimuli, to something that's experiential, the use of the space in some way, or things that they can handle, objects. It all depends on your students, and through the program of study you'll be in a position where you're going to know your students far better than we at Edexcel can. So it's about making that choice. But I do appreciate it. It's a slightly it's both a gift and a curse. The gift is we have the freedom. The curse is we have the freedom, and no one's going to tell us exactly what to do to make sure our students get the marks we want them to get. Okay, Maury says, I have a scheme of work and a PowerPoint for each session that prompts the students as to what they'll be doing in each examined session. Should I include that as my record of work instead of the scheme? That might be a really great resource to include, Maury, because if it's what the students see, if it says exactly what they're going to do, the only thing I would add is that if you change anything, and most drama teachers can't resist tweaking things just a little when they're teaching, just make sure that is included, even just as a handwritten notation. Can it be more than 4 stimuli, says Claire? Of course, the minimum requirement is only 2 per unit. The judgment you need to make is, are my students the kind of group that will feel after one lesson on the stimulus material they've done that stimulus and they need to move on? Or will a second or a third hour on that stimulus material put them in a position where they're going to interrogate the stimulus and the theme to a greater degree, and therefore end up with work of greater depth, understanding and imagination? So you certainly can use more than 4 stimuli if you wish, but it's about making sure that your students are supported by that choice. And I've answered your question, says Claire. Thank you very much, Claire. It's good to know. And Joe says, very easy to assess understanding of the dramatic potential through brainstorm discussions, do you not think? Joe, I absolutely do think it's really important to have that understanding. And a moderator, when looking at discussion, when looking at verbal tasks, would be able to get an idea of what's happening in the room and the level of understanding. But Ofqual requirements state that students cannot be awarded marks for 2 skill areas through one activity. Evaluation is assessed through the written documentary response. Exploration is assessed through practical. So there are no marks awarded for what students say in sessions unless they are speaking those as part of a drama activity. So it's about finding the way as a teacher assessor to give them a chance to demonstrate their understanding of dramatic potential in terms of how they are discussing with a group, planning a piece of work or developing a piece of stimulus material that's been given to them, and through their use of the strategies. I know it sounds like I'm splitting hairs, but this is it's down to Ofqual and what they'll allow. Okay, so that's the reason why we have to be really careful. And I think what's important is that in practical sessions, think about your balance. The vast majority of any practical session, students should be on their feet and using practical drama skills, not talking. And some groups will want to talk a lot, won't they? So that's perhaps the key thing to have a look at. Okay. And again, Scott, sorry, to go back to Scott, whole group discussion, is that allowed for marks? If you have a whole group discussion activity, again, just to go back to what I said before, you've got, let's say, a 1-hour session. Within that 1-hour session, if you had 50 minutes of practical tasks broken down into perhaps 3 different stages of work or 3 different uses of the strategies, if you then had, within the whole session, perhaps 10 or even 15 minutes of discussion, that would be helpful in terms of moving students on and reviewing between tasks, and it would also give your moderator an idea of that understanding of individual students. Having said that, what's not helpful for a moderator is for, in a class of 30, to have a discussion where every student comments. As we know, many students will repeat what other students have said. Many teachers say just as much as the students. So it can be tricky, because what can end up happening is there's a lot of work where students can't be given marks for practical understanding. The other problem with evaluation is that our students can drift into evaluating the use of skills and how the medium was used and forgetting about the topic, theme or issue. So it's important to make sure that we bring them back to that in those tasks. Russell's suggesting evaluation in role as a good way of seeing understanding, and I think obviously working in role is going to be a great way of showing the understanding of the dramatic potential of any stimulus. Don't forget, evaluation can only be rewarded in the written documentary response. And if your students are evaluating as part of practical sessions, then that is in place to further their understanding and to move them on, and to make sure it supports their documentary response writing and their note recording. You could use forum as your whole group assessment for learning, and that might be a good way. Forum theatre can work extremely well in Unit 1. Again, just be aware that for your sample session in particular, you need to give students an opportunity to be working practically. And the problem sometimes with some of those kinds of activities for a sample session is that not enough students are actually participating in the practical. A lot of it depends on the size of your groups and so on. And we've got some great suggestions coming through from everybody. And can I just thank you all for contributing? It can be a little bit nerve-wracking to do that in this sort of context, but it is really helpful for the group. Okay, so having had a look at your record of work, your moderator then moves on to look at the documentary responses. And just to consider, who wouldn't mind taking me back to the PowerPoint, Nikki, what is required for that paper? And we've talked a little bit about this, haven't we, about the difference between exploration and about evaluation. So for the Unit 1 documentary response, students are going to reflect on that practical exploration activities over the 6 hours. All the reflection they've done verbally, all the notes they've taken, which don't forget they can do either at the end of each session, periodically, pausing between tasks if that suits your students, at home if that's appropriate, having a regular write-up session every 2 sessions of practical or 3 sessions of practical, or however your lessons are structured. All of that information will then form the basis and support for their reflection and their evaluation of the theme, topic or issue in connection with the drama undertaken over the 6 hours. Some students will want to evaluate and explore and deconstruct that theme, topic or issue, and they will lose sight of the drama activities that were used. So it's important to make sure that you structure your notes tasks and your support resources to focus them back onto what did we do. The delegate who mentioned about using a PowerPoint to tell students what they were going to do in each session, that might be a great way, mightn't it, to get students focused on not only what they were going to do in practical, what they did do in the practical exploration, to get them focused on the evaluation of that. Many centres use simplified versions of their records of work to support their students as well. And we do have a lot of freedom in the support that we can offer our students. Obviously, as well as having looked at the evaluation of how they explored the theme, topic or issue, they're going to do that through the use of the strategies and the contribution of the drama medium over the 6 hours. And all of those things are going to be done as a kind of as an integral piece of writing. But you could break it down so that you could split your documentary response into sessions, or you could split it into tasks that focus particularly on medium, on strategies, on collaboration, and so on. So these are the strands of assessment that you would have a look at when reviewing the documentary response, marking it as a teacher assessor or moderating it as a moderator for Edexcel. One of the major things that it's so important to remember is that there's only this one assessment objective. That's why you may feel being a little bit picky, saying that we can't assess evaluation as part of the practical exploration. That did happen in our legacy specification, but we had 3 assessment objectives which both spanned the written and the practical elements of the coursework units. For 2D01, we have these 2 discrete assessment objectives. The 2 parts of the unit are marked completely discretely. There are discrete assessment criteria, and so are the assessment objectives. So it's just evaluation. That's all students are required to do in terms of their main skill area. And within that, they're looking at how they explored the theme, topic, or issue. There's a response to students' own work and the work of others. There's a focus on the use of the strategies, the medium, and the elements of drama, a real focus on exploration, and an appreciation of creative collaborative involvement. Now, 2 of the things that students find tricky sometimes are, what does it mean to respond to my work and the work of others? Well, my work could be my ideas and my suggestions and the things that I did as part of my group. They also could expand outwards to my group and what we did. Many students find it very easy to write about we and harder to focus on themselves. Equally, the work of others could be the work of others in terms of a different group when work was shared as part of the exploration process. It could be the work of somebody else in my group, someone or a number of individuals in my group who came up with suggestions and thoughts, who had intentions. So it depends on whether students feel most comfortable writing about a point in the exploration process where something was viewed, or the process of getting to that point. Both of those are equally valid as long as students don't start writing about any performances which should not be taking place, which must not be taking place as part of Unit 1. Oh, I'm sorry, I've jumped ahead, I think. Excuse me. So back to the idea about the response to students' own work and the work of others. We is something in terms of examples where they tend to be very general. And if students are only writing about what we did, they may well cover generally the idea of my own work and the work of others, but they're not going to hit it specifically enough to meet the criteria at a sufficiently high level to generate a high level mark. Okay, so just be aware of that and give your students opportunities to use different types of examples of my own work and the work of others. Equally, when it comes to creative collaborative involvement, make sure that that creative is part of the collaboration. Sometimes students write about collaboration in terms of who had a music lesson every Tuesday at 10 o'clock and was always late to drama, and who was always absent because they weren't very happy at school in year 11, or so on. So make sure that those collaborative comments are focused on that collaborative process of exploring the theme, topic, or issue. I know it sounds obvious, but students do sometimes drift off, and as I said before, our job is to drag them back to the focus of the unit. Okay, these are the things that you as a teacher assessor are looking for when you're marking your documentary responses, and we're going to do a little bit of moderation now. The way the next part of the course is going to run is that I'm going to just answer a few questions first of all. We're then going to take a look at the documentary response and give you some time to read through that, and then you're going to tell me what you think the level achieved by this student is. And we're going to look at another open question in terms of the teacher assessor comments on the D1A. Okay, so just having a look, I've got some questions that are about technical issues, which I'm just obviously going to ignore because that's for Nikki to respond to. So hopefully if you're having technical issues, Nikki's obviously got back to you on that. Okay, and we've got a guest who says we've been trying to do standardisation at our school, but we cannot find the actual marks awarded in the exemplar material. That's because they haven't been issued yet. What will happen is at the end of this term, when the majority of centres have had time to do the standardisation, all the marks and the moderator commentary will be up on the website. For today, you will go away with the Unit 1 marks and comments. And the idea is the standardisation is a much more practical exercise if you have to find those marks than if you are looking at the work and comparing it with marks. But after Christmas, you'll be in a position to do just that if you prefer. Okay, I've got another question. Oh, no, I haven't. That was just a Nikki technical issue. And I've got Jonathan. Jonathan says, my students tend to refer to work sharing as performers. Is this a problem? No, it isn't, Jonathan. It's a semantics, isn't it? The way that we tend to define performance, and this is a good thing to speak about with your students so they understand the difference, is that when we are preparing work for performance, we spend a considerable amount of time on it and the work is repeated. So we refine it, we repeat it, and we focus on the impact on the audience. In exploration work, the work may be rough around the edges. It may well be work that's completed in a shorter amount of time, and the focus will be on what does the person involved in the drama or the people involved in the drama learn. So it's really about looking at it from the point of view of I'm experiencing the drama, what does doing and taking part in this activity teach me? And I think if we can think about those two different ways of looking at work, both of those approaches require that work is shared, because until we've actually shared the work, we haven't had the experience, have we, as drama students? So having said that, they will slip and they will call it performance, and so will you when you're in your sample session. You're going to talk about performing because it's very, very close together. Please don't worry about that. Moderators do know that that's what happens, but we can recognise performance when we see it. Equally, we can recognise work being shared. Okay, so thanks for that question, Jonathan. And Izzy says, can you please talk us through the dreaded fixed camera position? My studio is a low roof and it's so hard to get the whole lot in the picture. Izzy, I am going to talk about it, but if you don't mind being patient, I'm going to come back to your question a little bit later on the course when we look at some of the video for this sample session for this unit. Okay, so thanks very much for that question. Good, okay. Glad you're happy, Izzy. All right, now keep on sending your questions in. I'm going to have a look at some more questions in a short time, but I would just like it if Nikki wouldn't mind pulling up the documentary response for candidate A. Now, as I said, in the pack that you're going to take away at the end of this session, you are going to have all the marks and comments for all 5 candidates. It is getting dark now, so we didn't want you to have to work too hard. Obviously, in a face-to-face environment, we can have groups of delegates looking at different candidates, which means we use the time very effectively. But as a cohort, you're just going to look at candidate A. And once again, Nikki is going to sync that so that you can control this document yourself. Page 1 is your D1A assessment form, and the comments that are going to be helpful to you in terms of being a moderator would be to have a look at the paper 2 comments, which are at the bottom area in that bottom box of teacher comments there. And the open question that we've got for you is, what level do we think the teacher assessor awarded this candidate, and how helpful are the comments for the moderator? But do feel free to type into the chat box any other comments that you might have. Oh, I can see there's some very eager beavers who have already voted on what level they would award the piece of work, and I'm assuming that you guys have done your homework and come to the standardisation meeting having pre-standardised, so well done. Well done you. For the rest of us though, we're going to have a little bit of time to read through the document response and to make a judgment, and also to have a bit of a comfort break, so that if you need to go and get a cup of tea or just walk around your space where you're doing the course, then that's an opportunity for that. we're going to be back in approximately 10 minutes, and if you could be ready in 10 minutes time to start voting with your level, that would be great. If you're not quite ready, don't worry, because there's something else that we can do instead if necessary. Okay, so do make sure that you get a break if you require one. Okay guys, and we'll publish the results of your poll when everybody has voted. I'm going to see you back in 10 minutes. Hi guys, well I can see that some of you have had problems accessing the piece of work, and the idea is, as I think somebody commented in the documentary response open question box, was to make that comparison between what the teacher thought and what the student was actually achieving, and they may well be very closely aligned in your view. If you haven't yet done it, the document zip box is where you can upload that file and access the work of candidate A. You will find candidate A behind the record of work, so it's approximately 8 pages into the document, so you just need to scroll down to that, and that is the document that you would be able to take away with you at the end of the event. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of time if you need to have a look at that, but while you're doing that, we're going to think about some of the comments about the teachers' comments, and about what was written on the D1A, and about how you in your centres might do something different or perhaps quite similar. Okay, Maury says, I don't think the comments are that helpful in that they are very general, especially in regards to practical work. No evidence or justification of marks are provided, no examples from practical work. Maury, don't forget that for the off-qual requirements for the D1A, the practical exploration box on the D1A refers to 6 hours, and only a general comment is required because the main moderation of practical happens from the sample session, and your comments for the sample session are in a different form. They're on the D1C for this unit. Having said that, you're absolutely right about how helpful it is to have very general comments. And if you take a look at the documentary response comments, they are equally general. We've got candidate A's written response clearly communicates an excellent understanding of the dramatic potential from the stimulus material. She writes clearly and concisely about the drama activities and fully justifies the decisions that were made. Excuse me. She evaluates the work in a way that demonstrates an excellent understanding of the drama strategies and mediums. There is a clear appreciation of the collaborative approach needed within the practical exploration. I mean, in fact, these comments don't even refer to specifically the exploration, evaluation rather, of the exploration of change. They could have been written about any scheme of work, any evaluation of that a candidate had done. And what we've got is a lot of quotations from the assessment criteria. Now, your moderator will have a copy of the assessment criteria. They know what the assessment criteria are. They will be able to identify where your students have met those assessment criteria. And so repeating that isn't necessarily very helpful. Equally, if you've awarded a mark of between 13 to 16 for this task, your moderator will know that you think this student is excellent. And by repeating that word excellent, you're not necessarily going to ensure that student gets a mark. Examples are much, much more helpful. Okay, so thank you for that, Maury. Really good point. So I'm just scrolling through the questions myself to see. I've got a couple of technical issues that I'm just going to skip over because I'm hoping they've been sorted out now. Joe McWilliam says, I moderated this unit 2 years ago. I blind marked this piece of work and reached 10 out of 10, 10 out of 20, I think. I asked for and received the marks and know that you awarded this piece of work 12 out of 20. I did not find the teacher comment useful as they clearly marked this in the wrong band. Now, obviously, we'll take a teacher assessor series of comments in the spirit to which they are intended. The reason that there is a moderation process in place for this paper is because it's very, very difficult for teacher assessors to be absolutely objective about their students. It's also an off-call requirement, which is obviously something that we perhaps don't always want to think about, but the reason for the off-call requirement is to make sure that teachers are forced to adhere to that standard. Again, having examples is going to support your students more than just repeating the criteria. And I think that's the best thing that I can say in terms of that comment. Maury says, though I have to say, as I annotate my written work quite extensively, putting in comments on this form seems a bit repetitive. Yeah, if you are annotating, and it's not a requirement that you do, but if you are annotating, it is going to feel like that. However, completing this form is a requirement of the unit, and annotating your work is not. So maybe it's best to think about how you could slim down your workload there, Maury. Having said that, many people do find it helpful to direct moderators towards where students have met the criteria. Just make sure that if you're doing that, your comments are for your moderator and not for your students, because obviously your students shouldn't see this piece of work again once it's been marked. Okay. Just to go down a little bit more, Claire says, I was told not to annotate their work. Are we allowed to? As that would be very helpful. So just to re-establish what I just said, Claire, you are not required to annotate the student's work. The requirement of the unit is that any annotation in place is for the moderator, because this is a piece of controlled assessment, and once students begin working on it, there's no dialogue that's written and recorded on the piece of work that's going to in any way compromise controlled assessment. Equally, at the end of the unit, if you wanted to use this this piece of writing to set a target for the next unit, if it's the first unit you've done, that information should be recorded elsewhere. So target setting for students, feedback to parents, those comments would not go on this piece of work that's submitted to the moderator, and they would not go on the D1A. So I think the thing is, it's about making sure that you have work that is supportive to the moderation process that you submit to your moderator. And Scott says, I insert comments at the side of student work when I think a student has made a productive comment. I use the front sheet to summarise my marking. And that is what many of our centres and teacher assessors do. Suzanne says the teacher has indicated a solid level 2 mark with excellent for 0203, I think, for paper 2, and level 1 for practical. More specific examples are needed in the notes, as they are quite generalised and not very helpful to the moderator. Yes, thank you for that, Suzanne, you're absolutely right. And Maury says the exemplars provided show clear examples of annotated work, and they absolutely do. This is a standardisation exercise, isn't it? It's not supposed to be an exemplar at all. Just scrolling through a few more technical issues which hopefully have been resolved there. Rihanna 2 says the teacher has used the criteria in their write-up but left out examples, and therefore it isn't helpful in indicating why they gave the award they did. Okay, so I think that's really clear that we're focusing on examples there. Joe says, I'm not sure it matters what the teacher writes, as the moderator remarks the whole thing anyway. Joe, absolutely no. The moderator does not remark. Moderation is not remarking. Remarking would only happen if you were doing an examined unit, because this work is marked by you. You are the examiner for this unit. What your moderator does is they review your work to make sure that you have a clear idea of the national standard. So the review of the work is actually focusing on your marking as much as it is on what your students are presenting to you. Okay, and one of the reasons that moderation is that as a basic premise of moderation, the teacher assessor's rank order is maintained. Moderators will take teacher assessor comments into account, but what they award marks based on is the actual marks in comparison with the work. So to that extent, you do have a point, Joe. And it probably isn't hugely helpful to spend a lot of time sweating over those comments. It is a professional thing, though, to make sure the comments do reflect some clear reasons why the marks were awarded, and giving a couple of examples, but it doesn't need to be War and Peace. Okay, And we've got a few suggestions about what people would give it, from 14 to top of band 2 to marking the work at level 2, 3. So what I think I'm going to do at this point, we seem to have some really good range of marks here. So let's publish this survey, broadcast the results, and see what people have awarded overall. If you wouldn't mind doing that for me, Nikki, that would be absolutely great. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through, I think one of you's already got those moderator comments, but talk you through some of the moderator comments for that. Sorry, Nikki, I'm not sure if I can actually do this, but hopefully I can. Okay, so what you can see is that we've got a range of levels from one person who's awarded a mark in level 1 down to quite an even split between level 2 and level 3. So potentially that's a mark range which could be as wide as from 9 to 20, although I think it's likely that probably whoever marked it in outstanding hasn't placed this at the top of outstanding. Okay, so let's just have a look at what the moderator actually said about this. Now, just to put it into context, the moderator comments for this unit that you'll receive, they are not designed to be the kind of comments you would get back from your moderator. You get a report. Again, it's an off-qual requirement. I realise I'm sounding like a stuck record talking about off-qual, but the same rules apply to drama as they do to chemistry, as they do to geography, to English, that for coursework units, a general report to the centre is submitted, and we're not allowed to mention specific candidates. But for the purposes of this activity and for example materials that we produce, we do like to give you a more detailed moderator commentary, which is actually specially commissioned. Okay, so that kind of puts that into context a little bit. For the specific moderator commentary, we've got a good initial paragraph setting out the work undertaken by the candidate, some secure evaluative statements early on. Chosen topic is deconstructed to a good standard, though there's a lack of connection at times to the practical work undertaken, and there is a good, secure use of subject-specific language in the response, including understanding of levels, still image, thought tracking, and so on. And there are various examples there which you'll see when you take a look at the moderator commentary. As the response develops, there are some stronger evaluative statements. At times there is more of a sense of performance in the evaluation, and the focus on exploration and the theme of change itself needs to be more explicit. That's why I was saying earlier about how when students evaluate, they can drift away from thinking about the theme and they can start evaluating how the medium was used in a performance context, not in an exploration context. That skill is an absolutely vital skill that needs to be communicated to students, bearing in mind that 25% of the whole GCSE is awarded based on written skills. I think it's probably a fair comment to say that in many centres, 25% of students' time is not being spent on practising those skills. Okay, just to continue and conclude those comments, there's a reasonable balance throughout of evaluation of both the candidate's own work and the work of others. It's noted this documentary response is significantly under the maximum word count. Okay, and overall this is a good response which covers the criteria for level 3 very securely, 12 out of 20. And if you just take a look back at the word count box on that D1A, you can see this is a candidate who's written 1,700 out of 2,000 words. Now, for many students, writing 2,000 words might be the equivalent of climbing Ben Nevis in the dead of winter in bare feet. It's just not going to happen. For those students, there's absolutely no reason why they need to be forced to meet that word maximum. But we also have to consider the other side of the coin, which is when we have a word maximum in place where students do not meet the word maximum, it's the equivalent of, in a written examination, students only writing for an hour and a half out of 2 hours. It could be self-penalising. It may not be in the case of many students, because it may be that were they to complete the work up to that word maximum, they would simply be producing more of the same. Having said that, it might well be that they can access a greater level of depth and understanding even in that one final section, which has been perhaps less evident in some of the earlier examples. So I think this is about making sure that students are selecting work to write about that they feel enthused about, that they have a response to, that they've got some passionate kind of memory of their exploration to some degree. And obviously that can be difficult in terms of producing that. Do really strongly consider for each student what is a reasonable amount of words that you want them to do. Some students will be more than capable of writing the full 2,000 and in fact will struggle to edit their work down to 2,000. And the skill that you're teaching them as part of this paper is about selecting, reviewing, writing concisely. Excellent training for if they move on to GCSE at any level. Equally for others, it's about how can they fill up some of those words and hit the boxes for the criteria. So a moderator doesn't penalise because the work is below word count, but it will be noted on your E9 if a number of your responses in that sample are actually below word count. Okay, so level 12, we've got a few more comments that came up here. Russell says, I'm glad you said rank order. Thanks, Russell. It's a really important aspect to me too. I do this and then move the group up and down to reach best fit. Russell, I'm really glad that you mentioned best fit because best fit is something that we have to consider with a substantial piece of work, with any piece of work. Some students will write really well about one session or one task, but may dip in others. It may be they can't remember those tasks as well. It may be they just weren't as engaged in those particular tasks, but the mark that we award must represent a fair mark for the whole piece of work, that through line of work. Equally, if you do have a very even, consistent student, you need to make that judgment about whether one person's 12 is the same as another student's 12, because there may be a number of ways of arriving at 12 out of 20 as a student on this paper. That's why doing a standardisation exercise and a centre moderation exercise of the actual work that's going to be submitted is so important. Now, I know that you drama teachers, and I'm one myself, that's how I know, you're just lazing around drinking cocktails, aren't you? You're not working very hard at all. So why it is that some of you grumble that you haven't got time to do a centre standardisation, I've got absolutely no idea. In all seriousness, you are so busy that it's very easy to leave everything until approximately May the 9th, when you start to think, oh, the deadline's in 6 days. I cannot say too strongly, this year, do yourselves a favour and don't do that. Spend some time getting each unit ready for the moderator when the unit is completed. Do some standardisation of your students. You may need to do a further amount of work in terms of those final things that need to be added in before the work is sent off. But if you can have your documentary responses, your sample session, everything ready, you're going to reduce the pressure on yourself so much more and make sure that the marks that you've submitted are actually the correct marks and therefore won't submit any, undergo any adjustment. And don't forget that even though you only send a sample of work off, the marks that are adjusted on that sample will be cascaded across to all of your students, whether you have 25 or 75, as some of our centres do. Jonathan says, I have some very conscientious students who write in great depth. Does it matter if the notes don't refer to every activity during the assessment period? Absolutely not, Jonathan. Think about the model of trying to have an overview, an umbrella of understanding of the 6 hours that is going to be communicated by the whole piece of work, perhaps by cross-referencing, perhaps by referring to developing understanding over that 6 hours, and within that there's going to be an opportunity for candidates to zoom in and to focus on those sessions that did engage them. There is no requirement that students write about every single activity, and actually, although for some students it can be helpful to get them to write a little bit about each task that was done, that can be a way of them getting through the piece of work. For others, you're going to end up with a really superficial piece of work that doesn't allow them to have depth. So you're thinking breadth and you're also thinking depth. And a good word to use with your students is, can they cross-reference? Because they're writing about how their understanding changed. So cross-referencing back to different sessions, referring to some sessions perhaps quite briefly and others in a lot of depth, is going to be a helpful model for them. Right, Suzanne says, I've read it now. Level 3 writing, she says. Thank you, Suzanne. Joe says, we're having a local meeting with about 5 different drama teachers. Could we have someone from EdExcel coming to that? Joe, there's a facility through EdExcel which is a customised or personalised inset department, what I'll do is I will give you their email address at the end of the session so that you can contact them, or alternatively you can give me your centre number and name and I'll ask someone from there to contact you, which is probably better. Okay, so I'm sure that is something that can be arranged, although timing, just be aware we're doing a lot of standardisation of examiners in January, so we're going to be flexible about timing, and it depends on location, but that is a service that can be booked through EdExcel. Okay, we've talked a lot about documentary response, so let's go back to our PowerPoint and think about the element of Unit 1 where students gain the most marks, which is their practical exploration. Now, in Paper 1, students need to show their understanding of dramatic potential. And we talked about this a little bit earlier because we were thinking about how discussion is a good way of showing that, but it needs to be shown through practical drama. They need to show the use of the strategies, elements and medium of drama. There needs to be a sense of focus and commitment, which will be at varying levels depending on individual students. The communication of ideas, again, through practical drama tasks. There needs to be collaborative involvement and creativity and imagination. And just to focus that down now on the evidence that your moderator will look at, the sample session is that vital piece of evidence. In the sample session, we're going to need clear evidence for each of the sample students. Now, it can be tricky because you may have one of those Year 11 classes where out of your 25 students, 7 students have got identically shiny, flicky and medium length hair that has been straightened within an inch of its life. And these students may look very different to you, but perhaps quite similar to your moderator. Try and think with your moderator's eyes when you're selecting those middle students in particular. Also, it's not a requirement that you review your DVD, but we're going to think about in a moment why this might be a good idea, even though you don't have to do it. Evidence of work in progress, and this is the dreaded sharing. So showing that work is progressing. It may not be that you do actually choose to share work as part of your sample session, but there's going to be some evidence of that progress happening, of work moving on, and going on to our third bullet point, a sense of development of ideas throughout the session. That's how we gauge understanding in practical drama tasks, because we can see that students' ideas are changing and developing as they use the medium of drama, as they work with the strategies. So there will be overall a very clear focus on exploring the theme, topic or issue practically. Okay, and that's what you're going to be seeing when you look at your sample session as a moderator. From every centre, no centre is going to get it wrong at all, because we're all working so hard, I know, to make sure that we do meet the criteria and benefit all of our students. Okay, so we're going to have a look at a short extract from the Unit 1 sample session. Remember I said it's a dipping in process, so I'm not expecting you to do any marking or moderation based on this extract, but we are going to think about it in terms of your sample session and what you can do to make your sample session moderator friendly, and perhaps share some good practice that people are already doing. So Nikki, if you wouldn't mind bringing up the DVD for me, the extract of video, that would be fantastic. Don't forget, if you have got questions that you've been sending through, I'm not ignoring them. I will come back to them shortly. Okay. I'm just going to pause it slightly just to point out to you that what we've done at Excel here is not something that you must do at your centre, but we've identified the 3 students that we're looking at in this session using some graphics there on the DVD. It could be worth getting friendly with the ICT department if you don't have those skills. And I can hold up my hand and say that I couldn't possibly do that myself. But just to point out that when you're standardising in your centres, that this will be, there is an introductory track as well where the students introduce themselves to camera, because that has to be silent because of data protection. They've been identified visually, and those visual identification tags are part of the session. They're not there all the way through because we felt that would be too distracting, but they do flash up at various times. Okay, we're going to keep on going.
You're going to write them down on your book as well. Okay, so you two are going to work together in a pair. You two together, you two together, you two together, you two, and you two.
Okay, so only a very, very short extract. It's not possible for us to show you longer extracts on an online setting, just in terms of streaming and technical issues. The point about what you're doing in centres to facilitate identification of the sample session, that would be very, very helpful. Sorry, I'm so really sorry, I had a slight technical issue. Nikki was just telling me my microphone is turned off and I appear to be back. So I'm just going to repeat myself. Apologies if I'm repeating information that you did just hear. Nikki, if you could bring over the open question box, that would be really helpful about identification in the sample session. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is just to respond for me, not writing it down on your own and then sharing with a partner as the students did there, but actually typing into the question, the open question box, what you're doing in your centre, and what do you think the difficulties for a moderator might be about what we've just seen there. Now, it's quite typical for students to begin work in a circle. In that drama studio, we had quite a bright studio. I'm just going to bring back and see if I've got the image there, just so you can see that verbally. We've got quite a bright studio. We've got students wearing dark clothing. We have got bright light coming through the windows at the back of the studio. Obviously we at Excel did include some graphics to identify particular students, but there are some problems here in terms of moderation, particularly if this part of the session had continued. So Claire says, good to start, but no drama exploration. Now, if you wanted to do students responding in that way, it might be worth thinking about whether this might form a non-assessed part of the session. We talked about preparation activities before your actual Unit 1 assessment begins. Students writing in silence and then discussing with a partner is not going to meet the criteria for drama exploration. So what's your moderator doing at this point? Trying to identify the students. However, That's quite difficult at this point because, as Sophie says, same clothing and not seeing faces. Did the pupils identify themselves at the start of the session that we didn't see? The identification is on a separate track, Sophie. So if you have the DVD, you will be able to identify those students. One thing that's tricky, though, is that some of the students look different in that track than they do in the sample session. Now, we know in Year 11 that hairstyles change. All kinds of things change. But that is something that's also worth bearing in mind. Claire says, my students wear different clothes, so either non-uniform if that's appropriate, or maybe adding something to uniform perhaps. Teresa says, my students wear black, and identifying colour for the 5 sample students. Teresa, just be slightly careful of that, because obviously your 5 sample students should be identified, they must be identified based on the achievement in that session. So you won't be able to select your top and bottom students, and you will have some problems potentially identifying your middle students, because students don't always operate in a session the way that we plan. Okay, so they shouldn't be pre-picked before the session starts. Therefore, identification needs to cover the whole class group. Alison says, students are asked to bring in a coloured t-shirt, and those who forget have to wear labels. Not perfect, but as good as it gets. Just also be aware that labels can be a little bit self-defeating for the moderator in the sense that we can't always see them. Imagine these students with a label on their front of their jumpers and wonder whether you'd be actually able to view them. And your moderator may well have a fabulous 40-inch screen and they could sit 2 inches away from it, but it's not a requirement of being a moderator. So it needs to be something that's visible on a bog standard domestic DVD player and TV. Scott says we do numbered bibs. Everyone speaks to the camera before the first session. We edit the 5 selected students in the beginning of the sample DVD. And that's great, Scott. If you have got the technology to do that, then that saves time for everybody. It makes your DVD very easy to view. It's not required, but if you have done it, do just make a note that you've done that so your moderator knows that you haven't pre-selected those students. And Joe says, you will not know who your students are necessarily. Absolutely right, Joe, you won't. You'll have an idea, won't you? But sometimes people do surprise you. There's got to be an element of surprise, hasn't there, in this unit, because it's about what happens practically. That's a dynamic thing. It changes. It's about chemistry. It's about students interacting with each other as well as with the tasks that you're setting them. Okay, and Jonathan's reiterating that as well. Okay, Russell says backlight is a problem. Camera needs to be on the other side of the room, need to see their faces. And if you have a look at the Unit 2 DVD or the Unit 2 DVD track, you'll see that the centre have addressed this and the camera is in a different place. Always a good idea to check what the footage looks like, particularly with a new camera or in a new space, or if you're new to the centre, before you actually go ahead and film your session. So yeah, be aware of that. And you can respond to what you can see when the camera is going. If the camera is filming, you'll have a look at the Unit 2 session if you've got this DVD sent to your centre, and you'll see that, sorry, it is the Unit 1 session, not the Unit 2 session. I don't know what I'm talking about now, getting a little bit tired now. You'll see that the teacher actually gets the students to shuffle into view, and that is something that you absolutely can do if you suddenly see that the students are not in shot and not visible to the moderator. Okay. Right, lots of comments about pre-designation, and just to make it absolutely clear, students cannot be pre-designated. It's not part of this unit. Scott speaks, not peaks. I totally sympathise with you for making that very tiny error. Maury says, I have filmed the session for Unit 1 but forgot to have students introduce themselves to camera. Should I film them doing introductions now or include an annotated photograph? Mara, you can do either, you can do both. Many centres used photographs last year and it was extremely helpful to the moderation process. Think about yourself going on to look at the rest of this session and imagine how much easier it would be with a visual reference point for each of those 5 sample students. A visual reference point that's not on the DVD. If it's in front of you on a piece of paper, you can keep on checking that you are looking at the correct students. And don't forget, when it's your own students, it's easy. You know what they look like. You know how to look for them. A moderator has to get to know your group of students very, very quickly. So make it easy for them. Okay. And yeah, more comments about pre-designation. Joe says fancy dress, and Alison says had one student turn up in a monkey onesie. Yes, the moderator should be able to identify him. That has absolutely made my day, Alison, to hear that. I've never heard an example like that, and I hope you don't mind that I'm going to be using that when I do Inset in the future, because that is absolutely fantastic. Okay, we're starting to move towards thinking about some of your questions, and I'm going to bring those up in a second. So if you haven't had a question answered, I will do that shortly. The end of the event is going to be looking at support again, reminding you of different ways that you can get support, and the different ways that you can communicate with each other and with us as well. One of the lovely things about today's event has been how forthcoming you've all been about talking to each other and sharing your ideas, and that is something that as drama teachers we can struggle with, because we're often working in very small departments, and in many cases we're working in departments of one. Okay, so hopefully you'll be able to do some networking following this event. Just to say, a final comment from Russell here in the open window. He gets students to sit in a semicircle to introduce themselves when working and identify where in the room they are working. We also have house ties at close range, which can help. Do you know what? That is also a great example of good practice, Russell, because if on your D1C form for Unit 1, you identify your student, and let's just have a look at the student who's walking back towards the circle here. Identification for him from some centres would read black student wearing school uniform. Now that doesn't necessarily help me a huge amount in this cohort, but supposing that he's going to go and sit in the gap on the other side of the circle to indicate whereabouts in the room he is at different points in the room, or which group he's working in, that's extremely helpful to the moderator. And if we just go back right towards the beginning of the session and we see our 3 lettered students, F, G and H, you'll notice on the D1C that the teacher comments indicate that student F works in a group with student G. That is very helpful information, because your moderator, it's giving them more points of reference and more context to the sample session. Fixed camera question I haven't forgotten, Izzy. Well done for reminding me though, just in case it did sort of slip my mind. The ASG specifies that the camera must be fixed. You can see that here. From this session, the camera's fixed. However, you can zoom, you can pan. Has anyone got any other thoughts about how you can get a little bit closer to groups of students when they're working in a big studio and your camera is fixed? The reason that the camera must be fixed is because if we move around the room with the camera, then for many students it can create a feeling of self-consciousness, a feeling they have to perform for the camera. Remember, this is about them experiencing the drama, and the video is the record of that exploration. It's not a performance with them responding to the camera. So that is something to really be aware of. I understand, Izzy, that you've got a really difficult space to work in, but you know, what we do find is that where zooming and panning is used judiciously, that can be extremely helpful in terms of clarifying what the students are doing. Jonathan says, I struggle with sound. The camera picks up general noise and not the speech of students nearby. Jonathan, you're not alone there. It's a technical term that we as moderators like to define as the Tower of Babel, and you will find that on the vast majority of moderation DVDs there is at least one period where all we can hear is the Tower of Babel. That's why it's important to think about having the camera look at what students are doing very specifically. Also, opportunities for students to share their work in progress. And Russell says, you've mentioned showing progress. I try to have an extension task to show differentiation if needed. And I think, Russell, that is also an example of great practice, because where you set one task for the whole group, some groups will get on with it faster. It may well be that you're going to stop and layer tasks on, and one particular group may end up having completed different tasks than another. That's absolutely fine, as long as it's included in part of the record of work, and indeed it supports differentiation within that group. Yeah, with large groups, it is really difficult, this sound Tower of Babel issue, but Suzanne says they can rotate to a fixed spot in front of the camera to be seen and heard at key moments. Now, you have to try it with your own video camera and see if it works, but we have seen many centres where they've used this technique, where students are clearly used to being rotated at a set point in the room, so it's not something they find difficult or that unsettles them in any way. So you would need to train your students to do this, but where it's used, it does work extremely well. It does overcome the Tower of Babel and allow moderators to actually hear some of the discussion that's taking place during that group exploration. Okay, I will come back to this chat window and look at any more comments that are coming in now, but Nikki, if you wouldn't mind just loading up the questions for me so I can just deal with those before the end of the session. That's fantastic. Okay. Right, so Jonathan says, you've got a question about teaching in a big hall and finding it very hard to record the session in a wide shot in a way that allows you to hear what students are saying. What do you suggest? Jonathan, hopefully you've got some suggestions there. Another good practice from some centres is the idea of blocking off certain portions of your hall so that students have no-go zones, which are outside the shot of that video camera. So maybe thinking about blocking off some of the space and rotating your groups. If, however, you can't do that because you just actually need the space for your very large group of students, you know, just remember to make sure that those students who you're expecting to be some of your sample students, and you may have a number of candidates, make sure they're on in that area that can be seen. So if some students drift out with a large group, you know, it's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. And we are all working in very, very different conditions. Okay, and Izzy, hopefully you're feeling a lot happier about the whole dreaded fixed camera thing. Just moving down a little bit, I've only got a few more questions here. And Teresa says, did I say they must not identify themselves by name at the start? No, I didn't, Teresa. The students on the sample session for Unit 1 and 2 example materials and standardisation materials do identify themselves, but all of that is without sound. So that's because of data protection, because we're using images of children. For your moderation purposes, students must identify themselves in at the beginning of the session or in a separate track if you prefer. And again, good practice from many centres is that students and teachers do use the names within the session, because that's going to reinforce understanding. Sophie says it's really difficult to hear, not sure what the students are meant to be doing right now due to the distance of camera and the big room. And that's a really good point, isn't it, Sophie? And hopefully you're feeling that you've got some thoughts about what you might do with your session to deal with this. Okay. Oh, and Claire couldn't hear me before, but hopefully she can now. Joe says, I'm not at all sure that a young David Tennant would get an outstanding from moderator for Unit 1. It's so hard to see in evidence. Joe, try and be reassured by the fact that it is a level playing field and that where you see outstanding work, and I promise you that you do see outstanding work, really, you know, outstanding work, it is very much evident that outstanding work is somebody who has got that commitment and enthusiasm, that engagement, and it does stand out. You just need to make sure that you produce the best quality sample session that you can, because you can see, can't you, what a vital piece of evidence it is. And it may well be that you need to take this DVD to whoever's in charge of funding in your centre and say, look, this is what is the problem with having poor quality equipment, and perhaps see if there is any way that the drama department could have a camera that might be more beneficial. Think as well about support that you can have in your centre in terms of somebody else operating that camera. Don't forget, it is a controlled assessment session. You are marking the students, you are supporting the students, you are leading the session, and you've also got the video camera to worry about. For every other controlled assessment, there would never be only one adult in the room. So don't forget that just because we're drama doesn't mean that we shouldn't have the support that other subjects have when they're completing controlled assessment. Okay, and there's a few responses that I'm not sure about. I've got some OOKs and some yes thanks and things like that. Sophie says, I have an air-conned room as I teach in Thailand, which may prove a problem with sound. So again, this is about reviewing the quality of your DVD before you send it off and thinking about the different things that you can do to combat that. Think about rotation, Sophie. And Teresa says, just to reiterate, they all identify themselves at the start. No sound. For moderation, the 5 sample students, teacher identifies by name, correct. Sorry, Teresa, let's just say this one more time. All the students do identify themselves at the start. You are allowed to use sound because only your moderator will see those students. But the tracks that you've seen as examples don't use sound because they're going out to the whole country, and we have to protect the identity of those students. But that doesn't apply in a moderation setting. As good practice, your teacher can continue, the teacher assessor rather, will continue to identify those sampled students and indeed other students, because it was likely that you're not going to decide on your sampled students until the very end of the session, because you won't know how well they've achieved until the session is over. Okay, Sophie says, I really like this idea. Great, Sophie. I'm really glad that you do. Joe says, great to hear you mention off-qual. So you have to have 80% on a purely practical mark. What's happened to responding? Joe, responding is now part of exploration. There's a practical response as part of that, and there's a evaluative response as part of documentary response. There's no separate assessment objective for responding. That's gone. And it's not 80%, Joe, it's 75%. 80% was 16999. Only 2 nines there. Okay, so just make sure that you're really clear that you're looking at the requirements for 2D-R01 there. And Teresa says, sorry, don't know how I misheard that so much. Teresa, it probably is because I'm talking too fast and trying to get too much information in. Okay then, just to look, going back to our presentation and to think about some of the things that you need to know before you log off. If you haven't received your pack, this code at the bottom of this screen is vital for you. You're going to go to www.edexcelonline.com. You are going to put in your results plus password and username, which is the same way you log on to all secure Edexcel sites. Enter your center number, select Edexcel publications, and this is the code that you include. It's a free publication, so there'll be no charge. So it doesn't need to go through your finance office unless they're very, very pernickety about it. And if there is that kind of admin process in place in your centre, it may be as well to get your exams officer to order this for you. Alternatively, if you struggle with that, you might decide to just ask us, Ask the Expert, or at teachingperformingarts.com. Okay, I showed you the homepage earlier, so you know that's where you can find all the resources that you need. They are constantly being updated, so you do have to spend a little bit of time checking there. I'd love to spend my spare time browsing the Edexcel website rather than anything else I could be browsing at the moment. I'm sure you're exactly the same. Networking with colleagues after the event, we have got a new Performing Arts Facebook page, and that is a great place to talk to teachers who are also looking at Edexcel specifications and so have got the same requirements to meet as you. And it can just mean that when you're feeling a little bit lost and at sea about an issue that you might be feeling, that you've got an opportunity to speak to critical friends who are in the same position and may have some useful advice and good practice for you. On Ask the Expert, this is the email address that you would use if you were going to access Ask the Expert, unless you prefer to do that directly through the website. As I said, that is staffed by myself and by Ginny Spooner as the Chief Examiner. And if you have got a Unit 1 or 2 specific question, it's helpful to put Unit 1 GCSE Drama, because don't forget, Ask the Expert is a service that actually supports all of the subjects and all the levels, and it is occasional, sad but occasionally true, that queries do go from pillar to post occasionally if they aren't helpfully labelled. So do try and make sure that you label up in that subject or contents header what it is that your query is about. Equally, I mentioned Paul earlier. Paul is our Performing Arts and Drama Subject Advisor. He's a great guy. He's really helpful. He really cares about drama. He cares about drama teachers, and he cares about drama students. And you can contact him on teachingperformingarts@pearson.com. And he will get back to you, I promise. Okay. They're going to talk to you in just a moment about the evaluation form that's going to they're going to ask you to complete at the end of this. There will be a recorded version of this event online for you to take a look at, and you do have a copy of the moderator commentary a couple of weeks early to take away with you at the end of this event. I will stay online for the next few minutes. If you have got any further questions that you want to submit, please do go ahead and do that. And I will also scan through and look at any questions that I might have missed when I was talking through, and I'll just respond to those in the chat window. I just want to finish off by saying thank you so much to all of you for giving up your time. It really shows that dedication and commitment to your students that possibly some people in the government may not be fully aware of, but we at Edexcel GCSE Drama do very much know how committed our teachers are and how much you care about making sure that your students get the right marks. From our point of view, our job is to make sure that all students get the right marks, and I hope that your insight into moderation today has helped you to understand a little bit more about how that process works and about how you can support your students more fully in the future. Don't forget, in the education in the 21st century, we're moving into a world where we have to prove to everybody that drama as a subject at GCSE can stand its ground when compared with the so-called more academic subjects. That's why it's so important that we can measure the performance of our students in the dreaded P word, I said it, but measure the achievement of our students in the coursework units, in that ephemeral thing, practical exploration. So do make use not only of the stand pack, but also of the exemplar materials which have been referenced by delegates today, as they are really good benchmarks. And in fact, although I didn't mention them earlier, there is a pack of 2009 materials that show achievement from level 4 up to the top of level 2 and the bottom of level 1. So you've got a very good crossover of marks that span almost the whole assessment criteria available online. Thank you very much, guys, for your time today, and I am going to sign off now and hand back over to Nikki, who's going to talk you through the last few tasks for the event. Thank you.